Hello and welcome to Jiu-Jitsu Red to Blue. I'm Tish Durkin and today we are video and we have a great guest. Naveed Shah is the political director of Common Defense, a U.S. military veteran grassroots organization that boasts some 400,000 members nationwide, and that is a progressive organization, which will still come as a surprise to quite a few people who have kind of a traditional view that patriotism is the province of the right, that those who wave the American flag proudly and who support our military are Republican and very often ultra-conservative Republicans. And all of the symbolism of nationalism and patriotism have, in my view, been hijacked by MAGA. So I think it's very interesting to talk to folks who wear the uniform, have worn the uniform, dedicate their lives to supporting those who wear the uniform and have worn the uniform, but really wish to fight against all things MAGA. So welcome, Naveed.
Thanks so much for having me, Tish.
And I just want to, as I was mentioning before, there's so many, there's so much material for us to talk about with regard to the military and MAGA, from the moral and constitutional principles to some of the national security policies and military policies that they have really mangled to the politics of it. But I wanted to start out, first of all, just by asking you a little bit about yourself, your own life story, how you came to enlist, how you grew up, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was at Francis Scott Key Middle School in Springfield, Virginia on 9/11 in eighth grade in a math class. And as it was happening, another teacher came into our classroom and told our teacher to put the TV on. And the girl I was sitting next to, one of my classmates, immediately started panicking, because by the time we had realized what was happening, the Pentagon had already been hit. And her dad worked at the Pentagon, being only 10 miles away from, Arlington. Her dad worked at the Pentagon and she was scared. And there were a lot of kids in my school who felt the same way. And in the days and weeks and months after that attack, we realized that it wasn't just an attack on our country. For me, it was personal, because they also had perverted my religion to justify that attack. So I felt like I had been attacked twice. And as soon as I was old enough, I knew that I wanted to go serve my country. And so I did. Joined the Army pretty soon after high school to go serve. And it was probably one of the best decisions I made.
And I mean, you mentioned your religion, you're a Muslim. And that brings us forward to the Trump administration and the Muslim ban and all the other rhetoric that that we've come to know and love from MAGA. And so I just wonder, as someone who joined the U.S. military, who grew up an American, joined the U.S. military, how scale of 1 to 10, first of all, on a personal level, how much does all that business, the Muslim ban and all the rest of it, how much does that bother you? Or does it not really register with you?
No, it definitely does. I mean, as a immigrant and coming from a community like mine where I grew up, it was like the United Nations. We had folks from all over the world, and we were all friends, and we all got along. And all of our either my friends were immigrants themselves, or their parents were immigrants, and for many of us, it was just normal. So to hear it being demonized by what should be someone in a position of respect and authority, by a presidential candidate and then the president, was really scary. For the first time, I think we felt like we were under attack. And then when the first thing that he did when he took office was the Muslim ban, even though it didn't take the first time, I think they ended up trying 4 different times to get that through. And they said, oh, it's only applies to so-and-so, and it only applies to this number of people. There were people stuck at airports, waiting, with their families on the other side, trying to figure out how they were going to get here. Many of these people who did nothing wrong themselves, um, you know, just complete disregard for the rule of law at the end of the day. And I think what's most scary about this is the prospect of another Trump presidency when he'll have worked out the kinks on a lot of these policies. He won't need 4 tries for the next Muslim ban.
And did you ever find that when you were identifying or in your capacity as a veteran or a veterans advocate, so your identity was clear. Did you feel that you were ever sort of treated differently in the MAGA era than you were when you were kind of in some sort of setting where it would be obvious that you're a person of color, possibly a Muslim, named Naveed, and it's not obvious that you're a military guy?
It's really funny because I feel like I have to walk that fine line. There definitely has been a shift in the way that even the military is perceived now, because apparently the military is a woke institution, according to some folks on the right. But there have definitely been times where I've been looked at and said, and people have asked, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm a veteran too. That's why I'm here at the VA or at the local veterans hall." And they say, "Oh, when did you serve? And where did you serve? And who do you know?" And like I get the third degree level of questions, and it's really interesting to see that dynamic shift because I know some of my friends I served with, they don't get those kinds of questions. It's just assumed that they are. And matter of fact, some of my friends who never served also just get assumed that they are veterans because when we go to events that feature veterans, like a baseball game for troops and their families. I'll bring a friend along who never served, but because he fits the script of what people think a veteran looks like, they assume that he's served as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting time that we live in, and I think it's really important to recognize that the fastest growing segment of the military are women and minorities. The people coming out of the military today are more likely to look like you and me, Tish, than to look like Captain America.
Yeah. No. Yeah, so I think as of now, about a third of the military overall is racial or ethnic minority groups, and as you say, that is growing. So there is a great deal of overlap between the groups that are supposed to be poisoning our blood and the groups that are defending us, which is pretty interesting. Now, talking about shifts, we were mentioning that for many, many years, certainly the whole time that I'm a recovering political journalist, but certainly during my active duty, it was just a given that the military voters and people who had the military top of mind were very reliable Republican voters. But I think in recent years, that seems to be shifting. Am I right in understanding that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I think it's important to understand that the divide between the military and veteran community and the civilian community is growing wider and wider, right? And during the Vietnam era, it was like everyone knew somebody directly, whether it was a family member or at least a neighbor who was serving in the conflict, right? Now, in the post 9/11 era, you might know a friend or a family member who has a friend or a family member who served, right? Like it's very far removed. And so that's creating a real schism in the American mind. Like people just don't have a direct connection to the military like they once did. But in the leading up to 2020, I believe it was that the military community, there was a poll that was said 41% were for Biden and 37% were for Trump before the election. And I think a solid 50% of active duty troops in that Military Times survey in 2020 said they had a very unfavorable or unfavorable view of the commander in chief, which was Donald Trump at the time, in that survey.
Like for folks who are actually on the ground, getting up every day, wherever they're stationed and putting it all on the line. Do you think it really matters to them whether or not I know that they are obligated to serve the commander in chief, carry out orders, observe the chain of command, and all that kind of thing. But if you don't have basic respect for or trust in the guy way at the top, does that have an impact on the daily morale of the military, do you think? Or is that just sort of in the background and it's on TV and it's not too...
It definitely does have an impact. So I'll give you an example. When I joined the military in 2006, when I first joined, and then by the time I got to my unit, it was 2007 after all my training. There was a picture, they have the pictures on the wall of all of the commanders, starting from your company commander to your battalion commander to your brigade commander to the division commander, everyone all up the chain of command in the military. And then at the very top of that chain is a picture of the president. And sometimes the VP will be up there too. But when I got to my unit in 2007, of course, President George Bush was at the top of that chain. Come 2008, 2009, President George Bush's picture was still up there. And I looked around and said, isn't somebody, whose job is it to change that out? Actually, I don't even know. It wasn't my job, but I don't know. Should we change that out? And one of the other guys in the unit, who was a senior NCO, said, why would we change that out? That's our true commander in chief. This was after President Barack Obama's election, the first election I had a chance to vote in for president. And I was very proud that the, skinny guy with the weird name who looked a lot like me or felt like a lot like me, was the president. But apparently not everyone shared that sentiment. And so there's always that kind of element in the military of people, not necessarily respecting the commander in chief, but it does trickle down to the point where your commander, your company commander, your platoon commander is really the one that you are going to have to listen to at the end of the day. And those folks are usually pretty apolitical, so they will be able to carry the weight of their command without having to worry about who's at the top of the ticket. So I do have some hope that they will do the right thing no matter what happens. They will follow the rule of law. They will not follow unlawful commands from a commander-in-chief who might be compromised.
Now, the Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, which greatly broadened the seeming authority of the president to do a lot of things as long as he considers them to be in his official capacity. I think Barry McCaffrey or somebody was talking about how, this may give the president an out, but it's very unclear to those underneath the president who are not supposed to carry out unlawful orders.
Yeah.
What kind of pickle that leaves that, and that leaves those people in. Is concern about that top of mind at all, or is that kind of the rank and file are not really concerned about?
I think the Supreme Court's immunity decision applies to the president, and we're not even sure. I'm not a legal scholar. I don't know how much that actually applies to the president or what that really means yet. I know for sure that it's not going to apply to the line troops that have to end up, eventually following those orders.
Yes, like if you're because we've been hearing a lot about, if the president wants to order, Navy SEAL team, whatever, to assassinate somebody, maybe the president can argue for himself, but I don't think the Navy SEAL people are going to find too much comfort in that.
No, exactly. Whether you're a Navy SEAL or a intel analyst or, a parachute rigger, you're not going to be able to rely on that decision to say, oh, well, I was just doing what this said, even though it was an illegal order. One of the things that I like to point out is this: in the past 20 years, the U.S. military has been one of the most disciplined military units in the history of time, and almost every case that has been brought forth of any sort of war crimes or crimes in war zones has been prosecuted, and people have been thrown in Leavenworth for a long time for those things until Donald Trump decided to come out and start pardoning war criminals. So that normal, that norm that um, has been changed under his watch.
Now, let me ask you about this something that a lot of Americans may not have been aware of it at the time, and even fewer are probably thinking about it now, but I don't know how much currency it still has in the military, which is that whole episode of Senator Tuberville blocking hundreds of senior military promotions and leaving several, I think the Marines in particular, without commandants or commanders because of the Pentagon's decision to cover the travel expenses of female soldiers traveling out of state for abortion. Now, was that a big deal to ordinary folks in the military, or were they just thinking, I'm not a commander, so I don't really have to worry about it?
It definitely was a big deal because at the end of the day, what he was doing was saying that he was undermining the commander in chief and the chain of command, and saying that he knows better than the president, than the secretary of defense, and every senior leader in the Pentagon and down the chain who decided that this policy was important and necessary for them to implement. At a time when the military was going through a recruiting crisis, we shouldn't be telling anybody that, well, your healthcare, we're not going to cover that because, it's not important to us, or because it's for whatever other reasons that Senator Tuberville might have had. And he also completely misunderstood the policy that he was, when he was asked about what he was doing and why, he really could not give a good answer because he just failed to understand it. Maybe that's something to do, with who he is and less to do with the Senate itself. But his stance on that issue really caused a lot of problems. And at the end of the day, he had to back down, and the military is going to provide health care for its troops because that's one of the promises that we make to the men and women who are willing to put on their uniform and fight for this country and put their lives on the line.
How about the PACT Act? The PACT Act ended up getting, which has to do with expanding services and the definition of eligible services, the definition of eligibility for medical care connected with being exposed to toxic burn pits in the context of military service. And it ultimately, the PACT Act passed both houses of Congress with overwhelming bipartisan majorities, but those who opposed it, it was universally supported by Democrats. Those all who opposed were Republicans. Do you think that they will pay any price for that, or does that do anything to dent their image as pro-military advocates?
That's the thing, and that's one of the reasons why I got into this work. Is I used to be a veterans advocate, and a nonpartisan and nonpartisan veterans advocate. I focused on veterans issues and tried to help my fellow veterans. That's how I got involved in politics. I came back from Iraq and realized that things were broken. The VA needed help in setting its standards and going the right direction to provide care for the post 9/11 veterans. And I wanted to make sure it was on the right track. So one of the first things that came across my desk, 10 years ago, as a young legislative associate was it wasn't called the PACT Act back then, but it was legislation or policy changes about burn pits and toxic exposures going as far back as Vietnam, folks who were exposed to Agent Orange back then. So to see the PACT Act finally get through Congress was a huge win for folks like us who have been in the trenches for a long time. But the way in which we got there took way too long and was way too difficult because the Congress is so quick to send troops to war, but when it comes to taking care of the troops when they come back, it is absolutely an uphill battle that takes a decade or more and requires celebrities to come weigh in for us. It definitely needs to be talked about more because many people don't realize that at the 11th hour, the Senate Republicans blocked the bill from getting passed because of some political games they were playing And instead of taking care of the troops, they were still more worried about beating, owning the libs, as they might say, than they were of taking care of the troops. I think we need to do a better job of talking about that and exposing that and making sure the public knows and understands that, yes, this was a bipartisan piece of legislation that was almost blocked by the Republicans in the Senate because they weren't wanting to play political games.
Now, in fairness, those Republicans at that time said that they were concerned about the funding mechanism and that it didn't, the legislation as written didn't do anything to keep funds, being spent on priorities that had nothing to do with veterans, and also that it should properly come up for reappropriation annually rather than have the funding be automatic. So just quickly, do you think that's ridiculous, or did they have a point, or
what? I think there was plenty of time for them to work out all of those details. Anytime in the last 10 years, and not at the point of passage. And so while some of those concerns were valid, many of those concerns were not. They were, just misunderstanding the way the bill is written. And I think it's important to note that at the end of the day, the bill was passed because the majority of the Senate agreed on it, and a majority of the House agreed on it, that it was good the way it was. I think anytime they put these stopgaps into legislation, whether it's annual reappropriations or whatnot, it really just becomes a political football. And I don't want the lives of my fellow veterans to be used as a political football anymore.
And now, just jumping, and one thing that strikes me in lots of areas, not just in areas of veterans affairs and military affairs, but lots of political issues, is this idea that for purposes of argument A, we see we worship a group of people, and then for purposes of political argument B, we castigate a different group of people, and we often don't realize that they can be the same people. And in this instance, what struck me in preparing to speak to you as a progressive veteran is that more than 1/4 of active duty military families are in some way food insecure. And there are veteran, family advocates who literally are out there saying, hey, one of the requirements for every single military base ought to be a food pantry. And the reasons for this are complex. They're very long running. In fairness, one of the biggest voices decrying the situation was Senator John McCain, very conservative Republican who, he was a conservative Republican until that came to mean, MAGA. But so it's not as if there are no Republicans who care about this. But what I find interesting about that is that very often MAGA Republicans will say, oh, the soldiers are great, the troops are great, we love the troops, God bless America. And anybody who needs public assistance just, is a lazy, do nothing, doesn't, and they just need to pull themselves up and get some initiative and stop being such sponges. So when, meanwhile, in reality, you're really talking about lots and lots of active duty soldiers, not even veterans. So what that brings me to is one of the things I noticed on your website, which is that the reason that you guys advocate for the progressive side of many issues is because the military really does consist of so many people for whom income inequality, housing affordability, all these types of things that we often hear about in the context of unions and like workers' rights and things like that, that these things apply to a lot of rank and file military members. So I wonder if you could just quickly speak a little bit about that sort of overlap.
At a time when we have a defense budget of almost $1 trillion, it is a policy failure and really a policy choice that we are making for active duty troops and their families to be reliant on food stamps and food banks to feed themselves. It is an enormous problem that the military has, and you cannot recruit people to join the military if they look at the people that they know who are in the military and they are relying on food stamps and food pantries to feed themselves and their families. It is a huge problem that we need to address. Um, and the fact is that not enough is being done. It's being discounted to say, oh, it's a small number of people. It's actually 1 in 5 military children are food insecure. And so I think that's any number is too big, but that is way too many kids. So more needs to be done to address that. And at the end of the day, the military, you know, our motto is no man, we leave no man behind. We're leaving these kids behind every day. We're leaving these military families behind every day because if you can't provide for your family, if you can't take care of them, how are you going to be able to focus on the mission that's in front of you? I don't talk about this much, but personally, when I was deployed to Iraq for that year, I was there for 12 months. I only made like I think $40,000 that year. And that includes combat pay, that includes, all that hazard pay and whatnot. And I had a wife and son who were back at Fort Hood, Texas, back before it was, when it was still known as Fort Hood. And she was calling me back then saying, "What am I going to do? How am I going to pay the bills?" And I said, "I don't know. There's nothing else I can do from here. So how am I going to focus on the mission in front of me when my family is back home asking how are they going to eat?"
And I also actually, I'm going to put in a little commercial here for the fact that almost every Republican in the House voted against allowing states to do universal, allowing states who wanted to do universal breakfast and lunch at school. Some of those kids, military children also attend school. So some of the kids who need Head Start, some of the kids who need to get some nourishment during the day, their parents, if they're not, working 40 hours a week at an hourly wage job, they are very, they can also be those serving our country in uniform. So just putting that out there. How would you compare this? Just flew in my mind. A MAGA talking point is that the reason there's recruiting difficulty is that the military has become too woke. Nobody wants to fight for a woke, this DEI transgender pushing, feminized joke. And that's why you can't get recruits. Now I happen to be one of those boring people that looks at data, and I've known forever that when the economy is good, generally recruiting goes down because people have more options. But how would you compare the specter of fighting for your country while your family's maybe on food stamps versus being able to pick your pronouns as an impediment to recruitment?
Yeah, I think the idea of honestly, as an architect of the woke military, I think the idea and that's something that a right-wing outlet alleges that that Common Defense is an architect of the woke military, which is, I think, giving us a little bit too much credit, but that's fine. We'll take it. I think that a lot of that is overblown. The military, like much of corporate America today, is expanding their efforts to recruit more people from more diverse backgrounds because they are opening the doors for everybody. The military many times has been the place where social policies begin, and once they are shown to work, then they go out and beyond, right? So segregation, at a time of segregation, the military was integrating units. And while the LGBTQ plus policy of that impacted that community, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, wasn't repealed until very late. Again, the military, welcomed folks like that with open arms, and we should. Anyone who is willing to, at a time of war, or even now at a time of when we know there's so much strife in the world, is willing to raise their right hand, swear an oath to this country, this constitution, and this flag, and say that they are willing to fight and put their lives on the line for it, we should welcome them. We should welcome them with open arms and want them to have everything they need to take care of themselves and their families so they can serve their country honorably. The I think the real challenge, like you said, is economic. When the economy is doing well, it's less likely for people to want to join the military. Um, are some of the things that are happening right now making it harder for the military to recruit? Yeah, but those things are that people don't see the benefit that they once did in joining the military. When it comes to housing, they see reports of troops living in moldy barracks or families living near oil spills, right? And suffering from the effects of that. When it comes to, job security, they're seeing that their friends in the private sector have plenty of job security and they're getting paid more and they're able to, kind of live the life they want. Um, there's a lot of good things the military does, but when the economy is doing well, when people have options, they don't see that as one of them. So the military needs to do better in that case. It's the military's job to make it more appealing to young people, make it more appealing for people to want to serve their country. So at the end of the day, all of this, nonsense about woke being a problem, that's really not it. If anything, is what is making it less of a problem because people from diverse backgrounds are wanting to join the military and making up for the fact, and it's a fact that the old reliable standard of, the rural or suburban middle class white kids aren't joining the military like they once were. And I think that's what's causing this shift. So if you want us to be, you got to be the change you want to see at the end of the day.
Now, I just have to quickly leap to a political junkie question because you're from Virginia. And we're starting to see, this really doesn't, I'm cheating because it doesn't really have anything to do with the military, but we're starting to see polls. I don't really believe in polls, but we're starting to see polling showing, Biden and Democrats neck and neck with Trump and MAGA in Virginia, a state that Biden won by 10 points in 2020. Now, as a Virginian and a political operative, how should we be scared to death or should we be sleeping at night with regard to Virginia?
The polls that we're seeing, especially, with regard to Virginia, I think we're just too far out right now.
What?
The polling environment has changed completely over the last, dozen years or so. I haven't gotten a call about a poll, and like the number and types of people who are actually getting polled is very different now than it was. And I think there has been a huge shift. So while we can definitely look at those as kind of maybe a bellwether, I wouldn't bet on the exact numbers being right. That being said, I think Virginia has shifted a little bit in the last few years too. With the election of Glenn Youngkin, we saw that the coalition of folks that helped propel President Biden in the first time to a 10-point victory was not there for former Governor Terry McAuliffe when he was running against Glenn Youngkin. So I think if anything, what it means is that Virginians need to fight harder than they ever have before and get out to the polls, get their friends and families out to the polls this November, and make sure that the Democratic ticket it gets reelected, especially because Senator Kaine is up for reelection as well, and he's really a good friend. So want to make sure that he gets reelected to the Senate, that we have a chance to enact these policies that common defense and our veterans and our members fight for every day.
All right, so now we're going to liberate you the way you tried to liberate the people of Iraq. But first, I just want to make sure that is there anything I've missed, anything that you really want to get out there and advocate for that we haven't touched upon, especially if there's something specific that people should be aware of that is not getting covered in the contest between, whose candidate is older and more demented. What are we missing?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to know that veterans are not a monolith. They are a huge and diverse community that have a huge number of diverse opinions. But what the majority of us agree on is that this country is worth fighting for. And if you're a veteran who believes that, come join us at commondefense.us and we will open our doors for you. We have room for a ton more members, and we are in the trenches between now and November to get the vote out for our communities up and down the ballot.
Do people have to be veterans to join?
No, we have actually. So we have our veteran members, and we have specific training programs for them. For everyone else, you're welcome to join us as well. We'd love to have you as a supporter.
Right. I wouldn't have lasted 15 minutes in the military, but maybe I'll maybe I'll do a little bit better as a member of Common Defense.
Yeah, absolutely. Our boot camp is a little bit easier than the military's boot camp.
Yeah, so well, it better be pretty. I made it through 15 minutes of a ballet lesson in 1982, and that didn't go too well. That was hard. It hurt. Anyway, okay. Well, thank you so much, Naveed Shah, for all of this time. And those of you who think that patriotism is the province of the right, please think again. Thanks for listening. Tune in for more of Jiu-Jitsu Red to Blue. New episodes drop just as soon as I can make them.